Hi, welcome everyone to today's Tuesday Times Roundtable. I'm Eric from the Office of Global Learning, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, who is a dear friend of FIU and our office, and I'm just really appreciative of all the collaborations that we do with one another. Phillip Rank presently works at Church World Service, also known as CWS, specifically in the Miami office of their Immigrant and Refugee Resettlement Program. Through private and government funding, CWS resettles refugees and other forcibly displaced persons throughout the United States. Phillip is currently a resource developer of the resettlement program here in the Miami office. In this position, Phillip cultivates and nurtures local partnerships and volunteer relationships to assure that immediate resettlement needs of refugees are met. The South Florida offices of his organization assist more than 13,000 immigrant and refugee resettlement-related cases each year. He also does some volunteer work. He works as the director of Bochica, a nonprofit he co-founded along with two close friends. While he was studying here at FIU, Phillip is an FIU grad from the MALIX program. MALIX is the abbreviation for the Master of Arts in Latin American and Caribbean Studies. If you become interested in that program for a graduate school out of our Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center here at FIU. Phil, as he's locally known in Miami, has that degree as well as a Bachelor of Arts degree from Barry University in History. While studying at FIU is when he was inspired to begin a career in global development while researching the trafficking of persons from Colombia for the purposes of sex work and prostitution, which coincidentally had some human trafficking related materials at the sign-in table there because I had them in my office and wanted to distribute them, so there's some connection here too. I love these stories of FIU graduates who find their way into these types of careers through their coursework and various things. Here, if you were here for Florencia Dominguez earlier this semester, we had a similar story with her getting involved with her career in the International Rescue Committee. But with that overextended introduction, I give you Phil Rincon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. As Eric shared, my name is Phillip Rank. I'm glad to be here before you and to see so many familiar faces, some good friends as well that have supported me along the way. A few things about myself. I studied here at FIU in the Latin American Caribbean Center, which has changed the name to the Kimberly Green Latin American Caribbean Studies Center. Great program, really helped me and was very instrumental in guiding me towards my career and what it was that I really wanted to do. It allowed me to travel to Latin America, allowed me to travel to Washington, D.C., to work with various organizations, various nonprofits, organizations that are doing incredible things around the world. It also inspired me in graduate school to start my own nonprofit. And together with a group of other graduate students from here, we started a project in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, that now has grown to become an incredible program where the community has now taken over. And the program was really about urban agricultural gardening and providing, food security for marginalized communities. So I'm here to represent Church World Service. Church World Service, has anyone ever heard of Church World Service before? Just a few of us. I ask this question always because often cases, people don't know who we are. If you want to go to the other one. We have 3 offices here in South Florida, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. If you want to go to the other one. We were founded in 1946. Very interesting. We were actually founded by a group of churches. We are not a church. Many people hear the word Church World Service and they think that we are a missions group or a missionary group, or we are a group of people or a church in itself. But actually, globally, we are a humanitarian organization. We have programs, agricultural programs, water programs, disaster relief programs, globally and nationally. And we have a refugee program, an immigration and refugee program, globally and nationally as well. And that's the program that I work within. And more specifically, I work on a local scale. We have offices all across the United States where we resettle refugees, and that's what we're going to talk about today. You want to go to the next one? These are the programs we have in South Florida. Religious Services CHEP, which is the Cuban Haitian program. This is an interesting one. Miami only hears about our Cuban Haitian program when we have balseros that arrive. When balseros arrive, our organization works hand in hand with the Department of Homeland Security to help resettle these individuals in the United States. And usually we have the news media and press knocking on our doors to get an interview with a balsero, someone who has just recently arrived, about their experience in Cuba, what's going on. And so we have a strong relationship with the U.S. government and a prestigious relationship to really be able to resettle these individuals that arrive. And we have a religious service matching grant. Is a program that we provide certain groups of immigrant groups that have arrived. And it's just a job placement, work development program that helps them get a job immediately after arriving here so that they can become economically self-sufficient. And the program we're talking about today is a refugee program. We're going to look at a few terms before we get into a discussion. We are one of 9 prestigious organizations in the United States that have this relationship of refugee resettlement. Refugee resettlement is governed by or managed by what department of our government? Does anyone know? The U.S. Department of State. The U.S. Department of State, under the direction of the Secretary of State and the President, pretty much guides along what we do in the United States when it comes to refugee resettlement. And there are 9 prestigious organizations that have this personal relationship that work hand in hand to resettle these refugees on a yearly basis. Go to the next one. Key players, agencies and organizations. We have the United States Department of State. We also have the United Nations, the International Organization on Migration, the 9 agencies that I just spoke about. And the last 2 are very important for us, especially in this discussion. It's state and local government institutions and the local community. So first question, what is a refugee? Can anyone give me what they believe or what is the definition of a refugee? Yes. Good. But what else? There's one more key point when we look at the definition of a refugee. Anyone else? Yes.
Fear of persecution, and then later it was admitted to conflict within a conflict zone. And usually there is a movement, and there is the fact that they cannot return, like out of a great fear, they cannot return to their state of origin.
Good. That's awesome. And that was the key. The first part was the really important part. I want to go to the definition. A refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence. But the key point is that they have crossed the borders of their country. They have left their country. And this is the important key factor in the definition of a refugee, is that they have fled their country. I'm going to go to the next one. For us, for fiscal year 2016, we're going to receive 85,000 refugees. And these are the actual numbers from the White House that we're going to receive. 25,000 from Africa, East Asia 13,000, Europe and Central Asia 4,000, Latin America and the Caribbean 3,000, Near East, South Asia 34,000, and unallocated reserve 6,000. And these are for specific groups or individuals that find themselves in certain places that need that relocation or that support as a refugee. Yeah. Oh, so an internally displaced person is very similar to a refugee. Can anyone tell me what's the difference between a refugee and an internally displaced? An internally displaced means someone who has been forced to leave their city or their town, but they are still in the confines of their own border. So they haven't crossed over to become a refugee. Both internally displaced and refugees, these are international terms, specifically when we look at international law. And this really much dictates for the international community how international funding is given, where it's given, and how it's given. And really much, how the international community presents an interest or a desire to help a certain group or another. So internally displaced is someone that has been displaced within their own country. Once they cross over the border, they become a refugee. What is an asylum seeker? Anyone here an asylum seeker? Anybody? Anybody want to take a jab at it? Okay, no, but...
Speak for,
Yeah. That's as simple as it is, yes. So an asylum seeker is someone who leaves their country, comes to another country and says, I need asylum. And we have many different types of asylum. You don't necessarily have to be a refugee. You can become someone who's left because of political difficulties, because changing in government politics and you were forced to flee your country, or persecution from your own country. But you enter another country and you say, I seek asylum. And this is one of the key foundations of the human rights. When we look at international law, it's that all countries must provide asylum to those that are seeking it. Yeah. Sure.
So you said they don't have to be refugees. Persecution was included in what makes someone a refugee. So is there like an example that makes sense of someone who would be asylum seeker but not a refugee?
Great question. So the way we work in the United States, and this is when we come into national politics, we distinguish between the two. But globally, internationally, international law, there's very similarities and there's some gray areas. Someone that is seeking to be resettled, let's say to the United States, that list of individuals, those individuals are coming to the United States as refugees. That means that they were forced to flee their country. They found an office, a UNHCR office, where they were able to register. They were able to do all the background checks, to do all the vetting, the interviewing, to determine, to make sure that this individual their story is true. They're also placed on a waiting list, waiting for a country to accept them. And so many refugees wait for the United States to pull out this list and says, these are the new numbers for the next year. And they're actually waiting for a country to receive them. And so once they arrive in this form, they're considered refugees. But let's say someone, for an example, Syria. Syria has a number of refugees all over the Middle East and in Europe. If they're able to travel and make it to a country, let's say to the United States, but they did not come through that refugee program, they can say, I'm Syrian, I've lost everything in my country, I cannot return to my country, and I need asylum here, I cannot return. Yes?
Or immigrants, actually, because I saw reports that they're not actually allowing these people in. They see them even worse than humans.
That's a good country. And so we'll talk about that specifically with the United States. If we keep it here on a national level, what are some of the reasons, and we're kind of jumping the presentation, but what are some of the reasons why we may be afraid to receive refugees? Why would a nation be afraid to receive refugees? Yes? They might be affiliated with terrorist groups, especially when we're looking at refugees from the Middle East. Anything else? Yes? Diseases, okay. Yes? Economical impact on a national, state, and local level, which is very important, especially when we look at national politics, local politics, and we have a few examples. But all these are really great reasons why. If a country, we may think that they're very wealthy, but do they have an infrastructure to resettle these individuals? But one thing is this lavish lifestyle, but the other thing is having an infrastructure to be able to assist these individuals. Because one thing is to have a refugee camp. Another thing is to make sure that they become productive members of society and that there are these mechanisms in place that assist them so that they can become prosperous. They can have their own life and live their own life and not depend on a specific government to take care of them. But yes, any other comments on that? Yes. So Dr. Holbrook raises an interesting question. Some of the arguments, especially when we listen to right-wing media, conservative politics, they are afraid of receiving, or the idea of receiving, Muslim refugees. And that they're going to advocate for refugees to come to the United States, that they should be refugees that what? Have similarities with us nationally. And there are many implications as to why not. Can anybody think of a few of why this is important for conservatives in the United States? Preservation of culture. Anything else? Yes. Simulation is very, very important. It has to do with culture. It has to do with simulation. We have many cases. Yes, sorry, go ahead. Culturation, yes. Yes. And so they may maintain some of their own identity. Yes. Good. Power. It's an issue of power in terms of politics. Anything else? What are some of the fears that we see? Security. Security is a major, major, major issue. Yes. Freedom of religion. Yes. So we look at freedom of religion, but when we have conservatives speaking about, we're advocating for refugees, but Christian refugees, and not Muslim refugees. So we see this distinction in politics in the United States going on right now. The FBI pulled out a report and said to Congress, we are unable to really 100% do a background check and review everyone that's coming here from the Middle East. What do we do with that information as a nation? Yes. It's discriminating. Of course it's discriminating, saying one group over another. Mind you, Christians make up a smaller percentage. But when we look at the refugee, is there any difference between a Christian refugee and a Muslim refugee? Yes, just the religion they have. But they are both refugees that are seeking assistance and support. What ends up happening with politics is that we are afraid, we have fear of culture, losing our culture, seeing a change in the makeup of our own communities, seeing individuals coming to our country that are not Christian, that don't speak the same language, with a different culture, because they don't come from Western countries. They don't. They have different types of life that are completely different. And so this fear of losing what we have here in the United States by allowing these refugees to come, for many people in the United States, it's one of these arguments, it's a fearful argument. They're afraid. They're afraid of the newcomer. A sense of xenophobia, if you will, that it just cannot happen. Any comments on that? Yes.
Juan Gomez from the Law Street.
Yes.
The problem we have systemically is not a person's religion. The biggest problem we have systemically is actually processing enough people who fit the actual legal definition of refugee. And the problem is that it is so random, so arbitrary. It's very much roulette in terms of who the officer is, who you're in front of. So that it's considered, the law is that if you're fleeing general conditions of violence, you're not a refugee in the sense of what we consider the refugee in the Immigration and Nationality Act. And as a matter of fact, we have the mom who we resettled, critical service, we resettled a lot of moms. We have Eritreans who are resettled here in the South. And it's an interesting thing because culture issue is an interesting thing in terms of when it gets to your agencies, which are great, IRC, Church Service, wonderful, but the actual processing is really difficult. You have generations that have lived in refugee camps, whether it's in Kenya, whether it's in the Middle East, if you think of some of the Palestinian refugee camps, and most countries, one of the reasons why the Saudis and such do not want these refugee camps is because it can be a destabilizing issue. We had that happen back in the 80s here in Mexico in Chiapas when the Civil War was taking place in Guatemala. One of the interesting things that would happen was that sometimes the Guatemalan guerrilla fighters in the Guatemalan army would take the fight to the camp. And so that's one of the factors why one country might not want a refugee camp. Not to mention that when the theater is over, when the big conflict is over, then you have thousands and thousands of people left over. And what do you do with them? Because nobody really wants them, including us.
Very true. That happens a lot.
Sorry, I jumped in.
No, please, this is a discussion. Thank you so much for helping. We can go to the next slide, okay? Speaking about countries that should be receiving them, countries in the region and in Europe have so far taken the lion's share of responsibility. Turkey is currently hosting almost 2 million refugees. Over 1 million Syrian refugees are in Lebanon, and more than 600,000 are in Jordan. and over 100,000 refugees have taken refuge in Egypt. So the Middle East is assisting, right? But I think the numbers are that a little more than half the country has left Syria, fled. Where do we put them? Where do they go? The support of the international community. We are seeing some support here. Okay, Germany expects to take in as many as 1 million asylum seekers this year. Thousands of Germans have pledged to help the refugees arriving in their country. And so this is what we see with certain countries on a national level saying, yes, we're willing to take. Yes?
Is there like kind of like a law or anything in the UN that makes the countries take refugees? Because it's kind of like, I feel ashamed that Turkey, who has conflicts with another country that has way less economical power than US and Canada and Australia, is taking over 2 million refugees, while Canada and Australia are taking 15,000. Why is that happening?
Well, it is. We look at the UN Declaration on Human Rights, and it says there that we must take in asylum seekers. We must take them. And it's a Declaration of Human Rights. And it is, when we look at refugees and asylum seekers, individuals saying, I need refuge, I need support. This is an issue of human rights at the end of the day. These are people that have fled their country looking for support. And where is that support from the international community? Do we hear much of it? No, we don't. Nationally, if we look at the numbers, I think it's the next one. I think, well, actually for this year, we're going to receive 10,000 for next year. 10,000 Syrian refugees. Go up, sorry, one more. Go up. The United States is only going to receive 10,000 Syrian refugees. This is the number that we have allocated the Obama administration for refugees. He would love to receive, through the State Department, 100,000 refugees. 100. But it's not going to go through politics. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But then we see countries that are taking in 100,000 refugees, 15,000, 600,000. Turkey with almost 2 million refugees. What do you think the United States should do in this instance?
Accept more.
Sorry,
Accept more.
Accept more? Why?
Why not? Well, I mean, so what? I mean, so what if people are afraid? And I mean, we all are like afraid of something, but that doesn't stop everyone else from doing something just because you are afraid.
Any comments on that? Why or why not? Awesome. Really good points. I'll get to you in a moment. But one of the points that you mentioned, which is, and I'll share with you after the next example, some of the struggles we've had as a refugee resettlement organization. And it is, where do we put them? What resources are available to them locally? Once government funding ends for them, what happens to their lives? These are certain questions that are going through their mind and also our mind. And we do have great success stories, and we have some stories that we wish we could have done more. But really, on a local level, if we don't do resettlement right, who pays the price? We all do. Our schools will pay the price. Our public schools will pay the price. Law enforcement will pay the price. Our communities will pay the price, not only for us, but for them most of all. If we decide to take them and we weren't prepared to actually receive them and resettle them properly, we may have a much larger problem on our hands. Yes? Very good. Sorry, I jumped you. that's very interesting. And that you bring up some really great points. And then the next example is going to, not this one, but the one afterwards, is going to really hit on your point. In terms of culture, in terms of, it very interesting changes. But we'll get to that in a moment. The unaccompanied minors. Does anybody remember what happened with the unaccompanied minors? What happened? Maybe you might have some experience with this.
Those people, in lay sense, the word refugee is used. A refugee is only someone who's already been diagnosed or identified as someone who is outside of their country of nationality or last habitual residence, for example, in the case of Palestinians, because they're not considered to have a country, who fear persecution based on one of 5 protected grounds: race, religion, nationality, particular social group, or political opinion. Everybody else, crime, general violence, we deny refugee we deny asylum to people all the time who are fleeing gang violence. We deny asylum to people who are fleeing. If your house is in the middle of a battle zone, you're not a refugee. You just happen to be in general conditions of violence. Now, how that is implemented is a different matter. With the unaccompanied minors, one of the big problems is that the flow hasn't really stopped. And where do you stop? Because, for example, you were mentioning controlling. We have, in the U.S., we have the big idea of the DREAM Act, right? Helping all these kids who have been here for years. Well, the 70-some thousand who came in last year, and that's just the unaccompanied minors, not counting the semi-adults, not counting the regular adults. We have a big problem because we have big flow from the southern border. Not to mention that we do have people from around the world who come in through the southern border, the northern border, and like Germany, like the rest of these countries, we have to adjudicate, we have to make a decision. Do you fit into one of these pigeonholes? If you don't, we're going to send you back. And before we canonize Germany, before we canonize any of these other countries that appear to be taking refugees, I noticed that it says that 100,000 took refuge in Egypt. Egypt produces refugees. Turkey, if you ever want to have a really bad tour, go visit Turkish refugee camps. You don't want to be there. It's a prison. And so a refugee camp is different than, and it depends on where you are, a refugee camp is very, very different than for example, my favorite example is always, how many of you think that what Africans in South Africa, and that is black Africans in South Africa, suffered was persecution? How many of you, by a show of hands? Was that persecution? Well, interestingly, laws said that no, that was just discrimination. So we don't protect you from discrimination, we'll protect you from persecution. And persecution is very much in the eye of the beholder. And so it's a very, very tough situation because you have this massive flow of human beings moving around the world. And the question is, how do you manage it? And then how do you, because countries like Egypt, which are kind of unsettled at the moment, have a big problem because, yes, they're going to have the problem, the Sunni Shia Muslim problem, because the question is, Egypt is mostly, in a way, governed by Sunni, but you have the Shia problem, and that will become a conflict, and then will that destabilize Egypt even further, which is part of the problem that you have Saudi Arabia, you have Kuwait, all the other countries.
Very much.
Sorry, I took.
No, it's okay, perfect. Comments on that? Yes.
I wanted to touch base on that because I saw a case of killing of transitional justice. I see this case of a person that was fighting the system during the apartheid. He got killed, and his son was there to witness the killing of his father. So 15 years later, he got to see the killer of his father face to face. He had to come to terms to see the killer of his father, like look at him eye to eye and tell him like, I don't forgive you, but you're gonna have your same things. But this was government persecution of his father because he was fighting the system. And then I wanted to go back to another point, which was the Sykes-Picot Act. I don't know if a lot of people know that. 1917, Middle East was split. It was all cut up, and it was an accordance between France and A lot of people don't know what happened to the Middle East during back then. But if you guys want to find out the reason to why all this mess been happening and it's still happening, you guys got to blame not the U.S. The U.S. just continued France and England's interest. But if you want to point fingers and blame somebody, everybody should blame France and England for doing what they did to that region.
But interestingly, though, I mean, comment on that a second. One of the interesting things is how far back do you go? One of the most horrifying things that we experienced in the early 90s was during the Balkan War.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, centuries old conflict. You had all of a sudden, for example, young Muslim women who were here at places like FIU studying. You had that their neighbor, who was not Muslim, culturally Muslim, was raping. You had ethnic cleansing that is typical of whether you had it in Rwanda, you had it in Sudan, you had it in Europe during World War II, you had it in World War I, you had it in the Soviet Union, you had it in the Russian Empire. How far back do you go? Do you go back to the Byzantine Empire? Do you go back before Rome was split up? Do you blame Xerxes because Persia was attacking?
I blame.
So at one point, it's a question of what do we as human beings today, what are we able to do? Because in Miami, one of my favorite examples of problems is, for example, we have an Iraqi refugee here in Miami who is completely psychotic. How many people here think that there is an actual bed to protect this man? A bed where this man can live? None. This man is homeless, and we have homeless problem, which is, by the way, one of the reasons we have immigration law is because the very social agencies that process individuals and that serve individuals said, hey, wait, we need to control the flow. And part of it was based on bigotry, on classism, on religious bigotry. It's an amazing thing because the question is, how is it that you can deal with a crisis on the ground and then be faced with the exact problem that you deal with on a regular basis of where do we take these people and have them be safe? And then once we're no longer monitoring the situation, what happens to these individuals? Especially with mental health.
Sorry, I'm going to.
You made a very good point on the definition of a refugee, because when we can sit here and play this blame game and go back to history, but that will kind of blind us to our current situation and our future situation. Because one thing about the refugee definition right now is the fact that it does not take natural disasters into account. And with climate change and the way the sea level is going to rise, we're not just going to have an international problem dealing with islands, small islands. Even in the Maldives, it's beginning. We're not really focusing on that, and not just dealing with the small islands that are below sea level, but even in Miami, there's going to be a big internally displaced population in Miami. So when it comes to what and who a refugee is, we not only need to go back to history and stop playing the blame game, but we need to switch the policies and incentivize our policies in a way that all the states can stop hiding behind sovereignty and just apply the policies in a way that we do end up saving lives and making a difference, really.
You have something called temporary protected status. There's something called la declaración de Cartagena. What happens is, how do you deal with mass migration? Because, for example, El Salvador in 1990, in the Immigration Act of 1990, was the first country given temporary protected status. And the question was that there was civil strife, and it was understood that El Salvador could not take these individuals. In 1998, there was the hurricane that destroyed parts of the economies of Honduras and Nicaragua. We still give temporary protected status to these individuals because it's understood that these individuals can't make it back. Part of it is, though, that it was haven, it's safe haven. Now, people have children, people get married, people establish roots. One of the problems that you're faced is that then that creates a pull factor for other illegal immigration a lot of the unaccompanied minors have been identified as children of the people who were given safe haven. The next big Salvadoran group was February 2001 earthquake. And the thing is, though, that these individuals are being separated from their children. And so there's no mechanism to reunite them. And then the question is, okay, well, I'm going to ignore the law, and I'm going to do what is best for myself and my children. And what honest person would not, or what honorable person would not do the best for their child? That said, Syrians are facing the same problem. If someone is shooting around you, it's really, you're not going to be able to live a normal life. Your child is going to possibly be taken by one of these competing forces. And one of my favorite Justice Scalia absurdities is in a case from 1992 where if I am a guerrilla fighter and I come to you, doctor, in the middle of the night, and I say, come with me because I want you to fight with me. And the answer is, well, I have to go to work tomorrow. I have children to support. And that is not a basis for asylum. And so the problem is that Guatemalans, in the Guatemalan cases, we had a joke that the U.S. would take refugees in boxes, in other words, caskets. But the truth is that the law said that you had to object philosophically to the guerrilla fighter who was holding, by the way, an AK-47 in the middle of the night outside of your house, and you're not going to survive that conversation. But the truth is that then, as a policy matter, are we going to take every single draft age young man from any conflict? And it's a problem. Even amongst the unaccompanied minors, the kids who have been recruited into gangs, one of the big flow problems is when the cartel problem, when Plan Colombia took place or took hold in Colombia, a lot of that industry has moved to Central America because of the weaknesses or failure of those states. And so it's a good safe haven for violent crime there. What happens is that then those kids and their families are fleeing. Because you see, as a matter of fact, that those gang members are doing exactly what the FARC and the ELN do in Colombia, a war tax, the chutzpah, to go up to somebody and say, you need to give me whatever piece of the profit you're making for this little stand. It's an amazing thing because would you not want to flee if someone is telling you that your 10-year-old daughter is going to be their property and raped? Of course. Now, guess what? That none of those people qualify for asylum. And there is, by the way, no quota for asylees, which is an alternative or a mechanism for identifying refugees within the U.S. But again, it's a magnet for illegal immigration.
So I have a question for you, and then I have a statement. My question is, when Obama says we're accepting 10,000 refugees, is it under a legal definition?
It's that we agree that we're going to take within our quota system, between the presidency and Congress, there's an agreement. This is the number we're going to take internationally every year. The truth is that, for example, in the Caribbean, the reason why you see the number is so low is because we use another mechanism called parole authority, so that countries like Cuba, which are still refugee-producing countries, despite the fashion of the time, what happens is that you still have people who are allowed, they're paroled out. So when you hear the number 10,000, it's probably not real. And the question is, where do you move? And Church World Service, IRC, and a lot of the other resettlement groups sometimes find that you have to sort of go and try to manage contracts and identify people outside. And then when you have a number, basically you're at a deli waiting to be brought in. The question is, you still, in a way, in one of your contracts should be, I believe, still, that you are protecting those individuals, you're serving those people. And all sorts of conflicts happen during that time, all sorts of messes. Imagine the trauma that people have experienced. So it isn't, the 10 isn't the real number. We process many, many more. And the question is, though, who is it that you're taking or not? And that's the messy part, because we haven't figured out how to identify someone well for security purposes.
My other statement is, I think the biggest issue with this country and accepting refugees is probably the spread of xenophobia through the media. Because on 2 weeks ago on CNN, they showed a video of a group of Middle Eastern teenagers on a train in France chanting Allahu Akbar, right? Which isn't a bad chant. It means all it means is God is great, right? With the tagline "Possible terrorists," right? And talking about how like France is wanting to accept them because of these possible terrorists. But the video was actually traced back to 2010 to a video on YouTube before a soccer game. So it's a misrepresentation of what's going on in the media that I think is really the cause of the spread of xenophobia.
Very good. Anybody else?
And one of the things that happens is that there's an impact to what becomes an exile generationally, whether it's Cubans or Salvadorans or Guatemalans. You have one of my favorite situations to run into was someone whose parents fled Chile from Pinochet in the early 70s. We identified them as refugees in Argentina. The child was born in Argentina, but is actually Chilean, and then is still not been processed in I think it was 2012. And the question is, those people have now been several decades in the United States. One of the most interesting things is that the legality was sort of like, oh my God, we never finished the process between the U.S. government and these people. But the truth is that there are now the parents were exiled. The child was child of exiles, and then the question is, what groups are able to coalesce and then continue fighting the fight that they actually wanted to fight for freedom, or not necessarily for freedom. And then the other side is a very interesting one with the children, because here, one of the biggest and most tragic situations is that you are all here. Go outside and ask people what they really know about this. And my favorite is, ask anyone here about what happened in their parents' country and why their parents came. And many people will not have asked, whether it's Haiti and the problems with the Duvaliers, or in the Dominican Republic and Trujillo. I mean, Cuba, whether it was Batista or anyone before, or Castro's, generations of ignorance. And that is the biggest tragedy, because that is why this continues to repeat itself.
So, as a refugee resettlement organization, so our process is to take in these refugees or become their sponsor here in the United States. We work with the United Nations, the International Organization of Migration, coordinates their travel from that country that they're in to the United States. Church World Service and the other 9 organizations, we actually meet with the refugee. We pick them up at the airport. We are supposed to already have, by contract, a place for them to stay. One of our greatest challenges is finding a location for them, because you have to have a relationship with landlords. You have to be able to tell a landlord, I have a family that is not in the United States yet. By the way, they don't have a Social Security. They don't have a history. They don't even have a bank account. But could you rent them a place? Many landlords say, it's my money, what do you think? So we have to upfront all that cost, which is really paid by the U.S. government. We bring them here to the United States, and through the work of caseworkers, we take them to all of their appointments, all their immunizations, all their legal documents. We guide them along the way through the process. And at the end, what we try to do within at least 6 months is to help them to become economically self-sufficient, so that they don't become a burden on our society. And this is funding that comes from the U.S. government, through the U.S. Department of State, and then through the Department of Health and Human Services, where all the support comes. But when the funding ends, what happens? We have a case of the Somalian refugees. Anybody have heard the case of what's going on in Minneapolis? And this is a situation, and I like to share both sides of the issue. We are, as CWS, of course, as a refugee resettlement organization, we're always at the forefront of assisting refugees. The situation with the Somalian refugees is that they've created an enclave that has become so large to be able to assist themselves. One, the local government has been unable to find the resources to support them, massive unemployment. What do you do when you have a massive community that hasn't assimilated or acculturated to be able to be a productive member of society? What happens to these groups of individuals? And this is what we're seeing right now in Minneapolis. We see this where the U.S. Department of State is rechanging their strategy and saying, maybe it's not really a good idea to put so many of one group in a certain area. Why? Because what happens is that the numbers become too large for the local community to to really simulate them and to help them along the way to become productive members of society. This is something that we see. Any comments or questions on that? Yes. So, great. So that's the problem. What do we do with education? What do we do with the system as a whole and locally? Who pays for that? And essentially, this is the arguments that come to play. Who's going to take care of this? Who's going to assist them? We have the incredible example. We don't have to go too far to Minnesota. We can just look here in South Florida when we look at immigration. When we look at groups of people that have come to Miami, and after 20 years in the United States, they still don't know a lick of English. Has the system failed them? Is this okay? Is this not okay? You look at unemployment. If they're unable to really learn the language immediately to find a better job, they are going to fall through the cracks. And once that government funding ends, who's there to assist them? There really isn't anyone there to assist them. And so these are the difficulties that organizations like ours, what we go through day in and day out. So my major work really within the community is to present the work of CWS, to let other people know in Miami that there are refugees being resettled in your community, here in Miami, here in South Florida. Right now we are receiving refugees from Iraq, Afghanistan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Burma, Syria. Okay, we are receiving these refugees here. You have these challenges of language barrier, work ethic. What do you do with a refugee that is illiterate, that has no work experience whatsoever because they grew up in a refugee camp? These are the challenges that we go through locally. Yes?
A question that I wanted to ask you is, because I see you said that you guys take the refugees and you actually find a place to live and they having a rent of anything. And that sounds to me like a really normal life for a refugee. And my question becomes this, what would be, I was thinking about two cases in which one would be like take care of them here, and then when the conflict ends, or would be the issue of putting them back. And the other one would be like they're becoming refugees, but at the same time they're becoming immigrants who are going to stay here. And we cannot be angels every single day.
So this is the situation that you have. They're here for 5 years. The conflict continues for 15 years. They have children here in the United States. The children are now U.S. citizens. They speak English. They don't know what happened in Syria. They don't understand the conflict there. They think they're American. They speak English. Arabic becomes a second language to them. You're going to uproot that whole family and relocate them there. Then we have the politics of today of Trump and sending them back and revoking their citizenship because they shouldn't be. This is what's currently going on the border with the Dominican Republic and Haiti, with stateless persons that are neither Haitian nor Dominican. And so yes, these are certain issues.
On a clarification point, how long does the refugee status stay? Are they a refugee the rest of their life?
No. Once they become here, they come here through that process. And then after 5 years of going through the process, just like any other immigrant, pretty much jump the line.
Residents and then citizens.
So then 1 year though, the quota for adjustment was eliminated about 10 years ago. So the thing is that within 1 year of arriving, you apply to become a resident, and unless you committed a crime or are otherwise inadmissible, you become a resident just like anybody else. The question is, can you then go back to that home country? They're split answer.
So they get the work visa a year after?
No, it's not a work visa. It's not a work visa.
No, it's a work permit. But yeah, the status is.
Well, they get permanent status after a year.
But usually within a couple months, they get the work permit. So we assist them to get the work permit, but they immediately also get government benefits. Because on the right, this seems like, wait a minute, what's going on? You're going to allow in 100,000 people, and then where's this funding going to come to assist them? But then this is where I'll end here, I guess. But this is where organizations like us, we need the community around us, because a lot of the work that we do has to be with the community, in conjunction with the community to be able to assist us. We have students that help us tutor refugee children. We have groups of students from FIU that are helping us fundraise for our charity events, for like our Thanksgiving event for the children. And there are many different opportunities, like helping set up a refugee home. I mean, this is an incredible opportunity for you to set up a home for a refugee that is about to arrive. And I usually, I love for my volunteers to write a card welcoming the family to the United States. So there are little things that you can do locally as a community to assist refugees that are coming, to be able to be part of that assistance, to be able to meet with them, break bread with them, share a little bit about your story, hear it from them as well, and to help build that community. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.